You know, raw computing power is just an absolutely awe-inspiring thing. When you really get down to it, down at the lowest levels of machine assembly, we literally have the ability to inspect memory, modify bytes, redirect execution, and totally control physical devices. It is the ultimate form of digital leverage. But in this explainer of the Noetican Assembly doctrine, we're going to explore a massive, foundational shift in how we actually think about all that power. We're unpacking a core thesis today. Capability is not permission. Just because we have the technical ability to execute a command absolutely does not mean it's safe or legitimate to actually do it.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Capability is not permission. 2. Governing the execution path. 3. Verifying the verifier. 4. Stewardship and deployment. And finally, 5. Bringing this theory into practice.
All right, let's jump straight into section 1. Capability is not permission. Bounding low-level power.
So at what they call layer 11 of the Noetican Assembly, we hit the absolute raw truth of machine code. And here, there's a strict, totally non-negotiable line between capability and permission. Capability is what can technically be done, like poking around in memory or forcing a jump to a brand new instruction. But permission? Permission asks the hard questions. Are you actually authorized to do that? Is your work safely contained? Has it got a defensive purpose? The simple fact that a system can physically execute an action tells us literally nothing about whether it has the right to wield that power.
To bridge that super dangerous gap, the assembly introduces these things called core safety gates. Think of these kind of like the bouncers at the door. They're the constraints that transform raw, dangerous power into a tightly governed capability. So before any low-level action is taken, the system has to prove its authorization and its scope. Is the execution isolated in a sandbox? Is the memory access strictly bounded? These gates, they aren't just polite suggestions. They're non-negotiable requirements that prevent pure technical knowledge from just turning into unsafe, rogue machine control.
Moving right along to section 2, governing the execution path, tracing control flow.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit down to the micro level of layer 6, just to see how a machine actually decides its very next move. Control flow isn't just reading a page from top to bottom, it's actually a highly governed path. A safe control flow means knowing exactly where the execution goes and exactly how it comes back. It's basically a breadcrumb trail. Step 1, we log our current location before the call. Step 2, as we enter the target, execution redirects, but, and this is key, the exact return location is locked in and saved. Step 3, we return and resume. If any part of this little loop gets corrupted, the whole path instantly becomes invalid. Boom, shut down.
Which brings up a great question. How do we mathematically prove that path was safe? Well, we use a receipt, just like at the grocery store, right? It records the exact instruction that produced a condition, the branch instruction itself, the path we expected to take, and the path we actually observed. And only when the expected path perfectly matches the observed path is the status officially marked verified. This receipt is the ultimate undeniable proof that an execution trace behaved exactly as it was governed to. No guesswork involved. All right, section 3, verifying the verifier, self-audit and meta-governance. So we've governed the low-level execution, right? But zooming out to layer 10 begs a really critical question. Who audits the enforcer? Who watches the watchman? There's a vital distinction to make here between enforcement and audit. Enforcement is the active system. It's the gatekeeper that's actively blocking or allowing transitions. But the audit layer, it doesn't enforce directly. It acts as the supreme watcher. It just checks if the enforcement system itself is acting legitimately, if its decisions are receipted incoherent. Because think about it, if the verifier isn't verified, your entire system is just built on blind trust. And we don't do blind trust here. Now, this whole abstract idea actually becomes a mechanical reality through what's called the self-audit pipeline. The system is just running this continuous ongoing loop, first collecting receipts and policies, then checking its own core invariants and comparing the safety gates that were strictly required against the ones actually observed. If it detects even a tiny hint of drift, meaning the system's behavior is deviating from the rules, it responds immediately. It'll warn, block, or repair the path. And the absolute most brilliant part, it caps all of this off by emitting an audit receipt. It literally generates a receipt for its own audit. This entire layer really boils down to one profound, undeniable truth. And I love this quote. A governance system is not trusted unless its own governance path is auditable. We simply cannot just write safety rules, walk away, and hope for the best. The system has to continuously, cryptographically prove that it is obeying its own laws. Period.
Let's step up to Section 4, Stewardship and Deployment, Civilizational Safety.
Now we are really escalating the stakes to Layer 12. What actually happens when governed computation hits the real, messy human world? Listen, autonomous technical capability is entirely distinct from the right to wield power over human systems. A computational model might be mathematically flawless internally. That's system capability. But deployment legitimacy asks a much harder question. Should this system operate here at all? Is it stewarded, accountable, and appropriate? Just because an AI can, say, automate a legal decision, doesn't mean it has the legitimacy or the human stewardship to actually deploy that action into society. To manage this crazy real-world complexity, the Assembly classifies deployments by escalating risk, and as the impact grows, so does the absolute requirement for human oversight. Like at D0, running educational math proofs in a sandbox, that carries zero external risk. By D3, we're talking about automating code commits, which requires explicit review. But jump up to D5, and we are touching high-consequence stuff like finance or infrastructure. And D6, that is completely prohibited. That's autonomous coercive use, like unreviewed surveillance. That level is just structurally blocked from the get-go. No exceptions. So to ensure we never cross into that unsafe territory, any real-world deployment has to meet these non-negotiable legitimacy conditions. The system has to declare its exact purpose and its bounded scope, basically what it is absolutely not allowed to touch. There has to be an accountable human authority, plus active institutional oversight, and perhaps the most crucial point on this list, there must be a defined failsafe and a clear shutdown path. Because honestly, a system without a shutdown path is, by definition, an ungoverned system. Finally, let's bring it all home with Section 5, Theory into Practice, the Rust Reference Implementation. So far, we've discussed a lot of lofty philosophical concepts. But here is the real aha moment of this explainer, how all this is actually built into executable Rust code. The implementation literally separates human promises from mathematically verifiable truths. A declared receipt is really just a programmer claiming, hey, my code is safe. But a runtime commit receipt? That is generated by the machine itself. It is the runtime cryptographically confirming that the safety gates were actively encountered and successfully passed. Human trust is completely removed from the equation. When the engine tries to commit a new state, it doesn't just execute blindly. It follows a strict process. First, it confirms the target is even allowed to be committed at all. Second, it checks the required receipt to make sure it's 100% valid. Only then does the engine actually emit a brand new commit receipt, logging the event into history. Finally, it stores that receipt and updates the state. So absolutely no computation is ever committed into memory without generating an ironclad paper trail. To really grasp the absolute gravity of this implementation, you have to realize the receipt is no longer just written in the program by a dev. It is emitted by the runtime itself. Safety governance isn't just a mere suggestion anymore, and it definitely isn't some afterthought bolted onto the end of a project. It is now hard-coded directly into the fundamental architecture of the execution. The machine literally cannot mutate its persistent state without proving, mathematically, that it followed the rules of governance. That is a game changer.
Which leaves us with one final, truly provocative thought drawn directly from that civilizational boundary at Layer 12. If computation should never, ever exceed accountable governance, is our current code ready for that standard? As we deploy increasingly autonomous systems out into the wild, this is the question every developer, engineer, and steward absolutely needs to answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions about what our technology is truly permitted to do.